Feelingly, I was regularly met by dissociated obliviousness, defensive attack, hostile projection, and shameless denial. Yet, I consequently found that I could now ethically no longer, as I more or less had self-justifyingly done before, simply continue to go along with the anti-conscious collusion persistently being implicitly demanded of me, as of everyone in such manipulative group contexts. So eventually I really got to encounter the collectively manifesting gay shadow, as well as how that impressive interpersonal difficulty in turn experientially more so provoked my own strong feelings and psychological issues, as unconscious group dynamics coalesced to oppose my subsequent concerned expressions of increasing apprehension and then rising anger. Harry, in particular, not only absolutely refused to even consider any psychological understanding of who we were and what we experienced and did, but now even loudly proclaimed that any such understanding would be murderously anti-gay and thus morally anathema. This was after several years of my activist organizing with Harry, during which I and others observed him persistently to act out dehumanizing themes of bullying, castrating, and controlling other gay men with a competitive, domineering enthusiasm while being very fey about it, that perpetually refused to acknowledge any responsibility if anyone protested. This ugly organizational quandary within the radical fairies schismatically arose because, conscientiously through my ongoing initiation into serious psychological inner work consistently pursued since the age of 18, I had more and more cognizantly come to honestly discover the true unresolved scope and terrible thwarted depths of toxic shame, crushing pain, infuriated her rage, and other related noxious feelings lastingly and injuriously engendered traumatically from my own formative past that were developmentally still needing to be fully faced, ably processed, and engagingly integrated psychologically so as to successfully fuel my own fuller healing from bitter homophobia and other poisonous influences that had, without my sensible awareness, stunted more fathomful actualization of my estimable gay personhood and better valued potentials. And in then dutifully responding to that core diagnostic discovery, I richly well experienced the materializing birth of a redemptively greater relationship with the homosexual transpersonal within me, as I also perceived with much enhanced clarity the entirely pursued extent to which I and all others quite actively colluded in covertly or unwittingly dysfunctionally reenacting traumatic psychological business while secretively maintaining thorough conscious avoidance of the darkly injurious actuality of inflammatory unconscious conflicts through all our otherwise sincere mutual efforts, unless insidious personality defenses were rigorously systematically challenged. It was in responsibly attempting to effectively bring my deepening awareness of these vital psychodynamic and relational issues apparently so influentially bearing on more successful subjective liberation to my principled activist work and participating personhood in the homosexual fairy movement that I educationally saw the truly pervasive power of iniquitous psychological defenses so strongly, fanatically provoked in otherwise decent people as supposedly aware individuals and in purposeful constructive groups, and through which I very helpfully and somewhat painfully gained, in the light of such reactionary controversy, not only a respectfully enhanced appreciation for the pivotal need, amazing potential, and epic challenge of usefully integrating an honest psychological attitude with gay liberation theory and practice, but also of how very much called for just such a synthesizing activist step was politically, in important moral contribution accountably toward better realistically solving the seemingly intractable problems of terrible violence and rapacious injustice that are today woefully still so rampantly unrestrained power mentally in the human world at large. As I persisted with these gravely consequent concerns interactionally among my fellow fairy activists in the difficult organizational context of a deepening conceptual and personal schism, I was finally able to get through communicatively to another fairy co-founder, Don Kilhefner, who also then more seriously began to thoughtfully recognize the historic usefulness and major importance of liberatorily learning to better actively appreciate the elsewise hidden psyche. And together, when we saw that Harry and others would now do all in their aroused power to oppositionally block any more direct exploration of gay psychological understanding, we frustratedly resigned from the original group and in 1982 founded an alternative educational institution still operating today called Tree Roots, to focus specifically on estimable gay psyche and its more growthfully unfolding psychological self-encounter through workshops, talks, and publications. Don Kilhefner was an original member of the Los Angeles Gay Liberation Front in 1970 and worked with Morris Kite to create the LA Gay and Lesbian Center, the first of its kind, in 1971. He was brought into the initial Radical Fairy Circle by Harry, just as I had somewhat later recruited Mark Thompson, another important early activist. Yet Don became deeply disillusioned with Harry's unconscious acting out. After he then joined with me to focus on the work of gay psyche, he went back to school along with me, at his suggestion, to strengthen our work, and has since become, like myself, a licensed psychologist. But I found over time that in our collaboration together, he would not endeavor to become more emotionally honest and authentic in relating to me regarding his psychological defenses and issues as key actualities needing real and specific engagement in the spontaneous moment between us, instead staying coldly closed off, keeping such matters tightly private. Since I now increasingly know that working for deeper psychological authenticity in intrapersonal and interpersonal relations, particularly regarding shadow dynamics, needed to be purposely foregrounded by all subjective parties present, methodologically to make better substantive progress along the valuational lines of further potential gay liberation, our relations thereby grew increasingly strained. Until one day in 1984, when Don and I were alone in his apartment for a meeting, and he suddenly and unexpectedly, hotly and viciously accused me of having stolen important ideas of his, such as that of studying a series of gay men's dreams for a doctoral dissertation. We were both in graduate school together at this time. When I protested that I thought he was misinterpreting my interest in entering a more substantial intellectual dialogue between the two of us, he grew yet more hostile and suspicious, finally denouncing me bitterly as a user and exploiter of others. From that time on, he was condemnatorily distant but polite to me, and we only spoke together formally regarding Tree Roots business, if at all, until Don eventually resigned from the corporation in 1995 and founded a new organization that was first called Tumescence and now the Gay Men's Medicine Circle. This split with Don, as I considered it, appeared to echo that with Harry earlier, in that Don seemed to be responding to a similar challenge to the usual rulership of psychological defenses, as if he had something deeply complicit to protectively hide, by lashing out accusatorily and then righteously disowning our association. When I had first directly raised this issue with Harry several years earlier, he in turn had instantly walked away, vociferously accusing me of wanting to supplant him. Don has since gone on, as some of you may have noticed, to a public career as a spiritual leader in the Los Angeles homosexual community that includes the ongoing demonization and trivialization of myself and anything to do with me, historically and presently, through shameless lies and distortions, while prominently claiming himself to be shamanic, psychological, psychotherapeutic, and Jungian, all four features of which career he initially learned about in any important way from his association with me, as I had been and was from the time we first met, practicing these particular comprehensions as such when he wasn't even very familiar with, much less doing any of them, nor was anyone else in our associative activist grouping. Such exploitational and dehumanizing measures suggest to me self-unexaminedly being in the unconscious grip of overweening feelings of envy and rage, followed by guilt and fear or even terror of getting caught if the perceived threat of culpable exposure for ruthlessly acting out such nefarious motives is not fiercely obliterated. A terribly infantile, anti-psychological stance, also suggestively echoed in more recent years by Don's extroverting articles in White Crane, Frontiers, and elsewhere, as I have more extensively discussed in my last talk. Articles by him which camouflagingly mimic the inclusion of a psychological attitude by occasionally referencing apt terms like archetype, dream, ego, and soul, so as to appear up to date in regard to what really counts most these days, while in more immediate actuality, something else entirely unprogressive is covertly working its violent, exploitative will. Such schismatic developments with Don, although challenging, underline for me again just how powerful and radical an authentic psychological direction was for future gay activism, and I consequently felt additionally confirmed appreciation for the helpfully guiding utility of a deeper exploration, theoretically, into homosexual thematic dynamics and distinctive personality growth as categorically amorously gay. After first developing the basic idea of a subjective gay soul figure as representatively amplified by an archetypally based double image, I then spent the next few years exploratorily practicing in the field, so to speak, experientially delving shamanically into enhancingly vibrant metaphors of numinous gay-centered archetypes, culminating in the radical fairy movement and the book Visionary Love, before finally returning intellectually to again formally reconsidering Jungian theory as the best methodological way to usefully approach a more realistic homosexual subjective comprehension and consequent better political emancipation. Now, with a much deepened appreciation of myself, gay-centeredness, and the amazing and often confounding workings of the dynamic unconscious mind. The written result was my doctoral dissertation in 1987, A Uranian Conjunctio, the individuation model of C.G. Jung as applied to gay men. In that study, my theme was to further articulate the masculine double as commanding soul figure, how it could specifically work functionally as the archetypal love object in meaningful gay romance actively pursued toward gaining something crucially worthy, how this homosexual soul complex, in an interactive dance and mystical erotic kinship with the amorously cooperative ego, could better than adequately operate a gay man's valuable subjective individuation generatively to and beyond the defining hallmark achievement of a stable gay identity and the virtuous adult capacity therewith for mutually gratifying love. While in my initial study of the phallic double as motivational soul, I had been theoretically concerned primarily with archetype as thematic content, here I became more so interested in archetype as a kinetic process of unfolding intrasubjective relationship, and in particular with uncovering the possible sentient nature of a homosexual-centric libido in the Jungian sense of the autonomously intelligent dynamism inherently present within the fundamental substance and diverse activities of manifestational psyche. In proposing a sapient homosexual form of psychic libido's basic organizing intent, its purposefully guiding eros, I thus discovered I can conceptually reach a much more basal level in appreciatively understanding gay psychosexual dynamics, the reasonable figurative comprehension of a gay-oriented informing intelligence at determinative compositional work in all the active libido's doings, its formative constellation of the personal complexes, its motivating experience of the originative parents, its propulsive shaping of the ego identity, its elementary transformation symbolism, its miraculous transcendent function, an ideational revolution of perspective in considering basic Jungian notions about human psychological growth.